Dear Mr. President, thank you very much for doing this interview, and let's begin with the recent events. In your view, how the Kakhovka Dam demolition in the Russian-occupied part of Kherson region impacted the Ukrainian military plans to deoccupy its southern territories?
I believe that this event had a terrible impact on many people on both sides. We will only see who was really behind, if it was an accident caused by Russians or if it was an intention, if the intention was just partial destruction or entire. But definitely this event will have an influence not just on civilian population, both in occupied territories and on the territories that are under control of Ukrainian military. It will have an impact on environment, on agriculture. It will pollute the area with different agents and also with a number of mines. It will complicate all military operations, including the Ukrainian operations. So in fact, the area that was flooded is so big that it has an impact on all military operations in the area.
And how Europe can help Ukraine overcome the consequences of this disaster?
I believe that we have already seen the beginning of vast humanitarian assistance, starting with humanitarian aid, with water pump, with purifying water facilities, with energy generators and many others. I've noticed new public calls for fundraising. And there are many people who are contributing to it. So I think that the assistance is not only coming from all the sides, but it should be coordinated, probably NATO or EU-wide, so that not all the countries are providing the same kinds of equipment, but rather that it is coordinated based on actual needs.
And how do you assess the first days of the Ukrainian counteroffensive?
Well, we saw the beginning that was, let's say, moderate. I believe that we haven't seen the true counteroffensive yet, and more will come. I would call it, with some military experience, as shaping operations.
And are you still of the belief that if Ukraine does not make a considerable advances this year, we will see this war turn into a kind of a frozen conflict with more or less static lines?
What we see today is that preparation for the counteroffensive took months, and quite naturally so, because to prepare significant military force, equip it, train it, get enough resources of all kinds of material takes a long time. It also takes a lot of resources. It also takes a lot of effort of all people involved. So even if we take it from this technical point of view, to get ready for a new offensive will take again sufficient amount of time. If we also consider the weather conditions that are very unfavorable through winter, then we will come to a conclusion that whatever is not achieved this year will have to be postponed till at least spring of next year, with all associated difficulties, including continuity of support. So if I say that we will see a window of opportunity this year, and then whatever will happen will take at least 3-4 months before any activity is generated again, I think it's the right picture.
And considering that the West constantly is moving in terms of weapons delivery, from defense to offensive, from mid-range to long-range missiles, can you categorically rule out that we won't see Western boots on the ground in Ukraine?
I think this issue is still the same. It doesn't matter if NATO troops join the operation at the very beginning or at the end. Legally, it's still the same. Whatever a country or a group of countries will join the conflict, it will, by definition, mean that NATO joined the war with Russia. I think no one wants such a war because with regard to all the weaknesses of Russian military and Russian state, they would very probably restore in such a scenario to the use of nuclear weapons. They indicated it many times. And that's why I think every reasonable politician would probably disregard such an option.
At this stage, do you share the view that Ukrainians desperately need F-16 fighter jets or other Western-made fighters? And if so, when will Ukraine get them?
What we see now is the beginning of training, but unfortunately training for fighter jets takes much more time than training for tanks or armored vehicles. So we can count up to 4-5 months at the earliest before the use on Ukrainian territory. But in my view, we were, and when I say we, I mean all the supporting countries of Ukraine in this conflict, we were probably slow in a number of areas and we postponed provision of some weapons. I'm proud that the Czech Republic was not among those countries. We were providing everything we could from the very beginning, but some countries were more reluctant. With the development of a conflict, they realized that there is no other way than supporting Ukraine till the success of Ukraine in this war. And that's why they are probably now more willing to provide the equipment that they didn't want to provide at the beginning. We saw it in the case of main battle tanks, we see it with the provision of longer range artillery, and we see it now with the training for fighter jets. So hopefully once this training is over, the pilots of those F-16s that are suggested to be provided to Ukraine will be used for much better protection of Ukrainian air against any aggression.
I think it will be really interesting to hear how do you assess the transformation of the Ukrainian army to NATO standards and also its operation of Western weapons.
I was present to the transition of Ukrainian military almost from the beginning after the annexation of Crimea. In my role as a chairman of NATO military committee, I visited Ukraine at least 3-4 times and had a chance to observe the progress that Ukrainian military was making. And with the war running from February last year, the progress took even much faster speed. So at this point, I would say that Ukrainian military is without any doubt the most experienced military in NATO, because no other military has an experience from so intense and large-scale operations. Ukrainian military also proved to be extremely resilient and fast-learning. When NATO countries started with the training of Ukrainian soldiers, usually training for some kinds of equipment takes months. But what NATO soldiers were managing within months of a regular training, Ukrainian soldiers under pressure were able to manage in weeks. So we see really extreme growth of Ukrainian military capabilities. On the other hand, one disadvantage now related to Ukrainian military is that it is equipped with so many different types of equipment that once the war is over, the military will have to go through stabilization and unification of equipment. But it's a technical issue. When I look at it from a more important point of view, and that is determination of Ukrainian soldiers, their ability to improvise, to cope with unexpected. I believe that Ukrainian military, in technical terms, in terms of procedures, if not ready yet, will be ready very soon.
And speaking about NATO, what are your expectations from Vilnius NATO summit, and what, in your opinion, will be a satisfactory summit declaration on Ukraine's membership? And should, in your view, President Zelensky come to Vilnius?
Let me start from the end. I think President Zelensky will be most welcomed in Vilnius. His presence would really mark the importance of the event. What I expect is a really strong language when it comes to long-term support of Ukraine. I see a number of countries agreeing on a long-term plan for support to Ukraine that will not be based on one-off contributions, but on a carefully planned long-term procedure. What I also expect is that the level of current NATO-Ukraine Commission will be raised to the level of Council. That will also mark much better status of Ukraine in this forum. But I would also very much welcome clear language about future membership of Ukraine once the war is over. Obviously, accession process cannot start when the country is still in war. But I strongly believe that all the leaders will understand that having Ukraine on board, both in NATO and EU, is probably the only guarantee how to ensure stability in this region, how to make both NATO and EU stronger, and how to keep Russia and its aggressive policies at bay.
But Ukraine wants to know when it will be able to join the alliance and what security guarantees it will have until then. And what exactly do you have in mind speaking about security guarantees for Ukraine until then?
Security guarantees is a very broad term. I heard about two, let's say, types or scenarios for guarantees. One using guarantees that were provided to Finland from the idea of accession to the ratification. Another speaking about security guarantees for Israel. We will probably see something in between. But what I think that if we just put on paper what we already are doing for Ukraine and make it a kind of a guarantee, including that long-term plan, it sounds as a guarantee to me. But of course it will depend on how much nations will be willing to commit their resources to such a plan. But if there is a willingness to provide a plan, then there should be also a willingness to provide it in a form of guarantee.
Speaking about EU integration, do you see Ukraine becoming a European Union member sooner rather than later, and when?
I already mentioned that I truly see Ukraine as a future member of the EU, and I see it as mutually beneficial for the EU countries as well as for Ukraine. I would also suggest that we can link it with a post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. I can even imagine having a kind of a Marshall Plan for Ukraine that would not only allow for a rapid development of Ukraine, removal of all war damages, but also as a vehicle to EU accession, because providing such a vast support in a number of areas, in fact, constitutes a set of rules that will have to be used to make it properly, but also will be a learning process on both sides. And accession period for any aspirant country to the EU has to go through a number of chapters, meeting successive goals, but they can be, in fact, used within the reconstruction process. So if we take it in such a parallel way, I believe that the prospect of membership in the EU should be very clear both for Ukraine and the EU. And I truly believe that this will be a good thing to do for both sides.
And speaking about reconstruction, you have been to Ukraine recently, and Czechia announced the post-war reconstruction of Dnipropetrovsk region. How do you see this process and Czech role in it?
Well, obviously, my country wouldn't have an ambition to reconstruct the whole region, but we were speaking about some areas where we can offer our expertise and our resources. There are 6 projects that are defined. Some of them are already on the way, and they go into transport area, they go to medical support, they go to industrial support. I believe that we should start developing these projects without any delay. There is no need to wait up to the time when the war is over, because big parts of reconstruction may start now. And the earlier we start, the better for both sides. I believe that such a cooperation will also increase the level of understanding. It will also increase the opportunities, because reconstruction is primarily the opportunity, and we shouldn't wait.
And it's especially important to do before the next winter season is coming. Let me ask you, are you worried that China would play an outsized role in the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Obviously, China is a country with huge capabilities, and as such, it shouldn't be left aside. I'm sorry that China didn't take a more active role from the very beginning. On one hand, discouraging Russia from continuing in aggression. On the other hand, using its weight and power to come up with peace proposals. Potentially providing incentives for both sides to sit at the table and to negotiate a solution. China didn't take that chance. I believe that China is behaving in their own interest, not in the interest of the principles, not in the interest of preserving the rights given by the UN Charter, but they are using this conflict on one hand to get stronger position globally, to be more dominant in their announced strategic partnership between Russia and China, to get advantage of cheap Russian resources, but also to learn from the conflict for their own future benefit. Because conflict in Ukraine is an open textbook for China. They are learning how the West is reacting, how fast, how efficient we are in our reactions, what are the sources of our decision making, and this all might be used in the future with regard to Taiwan. So we'll see how China will behave, and we should also be careful for preventing China to start the initiative once the war is over, because I suspect that China will be more active when it comes to reconstruction, because then it will provide tremendous opportunities for reconstruction, both Russia and Ukraine. And of course, we'll have to keep an eye on such an effort, because it is clear that China will not do it from humanitarian reasons, but simply to get influence and control.
Let's speak about Russia for a little. Could you imagine any peace negotiations with Putin's regime, let's say after some convincing Ukrainian successes on the battlefield, or it should be some Putin's successors not connected to this horrible war with whom both Ukraine and West could communicate?
Quite frankly, right now, I'm not very happy to hear that some Western leaders think about having meetings with Putin. Frankly, I cannot imagine it right now. With the leaders who are so cynical to lie almost at a daily basis, who distort the information, who are able to blame the country they invaded from atrocities. It's very difficult to imagine that one could sit at a table with somebody like that, because if you cannot trust the arguments of your counterpart at the table, how can you hope for coming up to any reasonable conclusion? But hopefully once the situation develops and once Ukraine is more successful in their counteroffensive, I hope that it will bring even Russian leadership to a different position, and they will probably be more willing to come to a pragmatic negotiation. But at this point, I don't see it.
Let me ask you this question. Should all blame for Russian aggression against Ukraine be put on Putin and the Kremlin, or all Russian society bears responsibility for it?
I heard that argument quite often, that we should only take it as Putin's war, not a Russian war. It's not a good argument. When we look at support that President Putin enjoys among Russian population, when we see how many people are supporting the war, how many people are even calling for extending the war on other countries, we have to call it Russian war.
And what do you think about Russia's future? And should the Western countries, including Czechia, maintain ties with Russian opposition outside of Russia? Or are these people just politically hopeless emigrants who won't influence any processes in the future Russia?
When we look at current Russia, not all the people are happy with the regime. Even though support of Vladimir Putin and the war runs up to 75, 80%, then what about those remaining 20 or more percent? I'm sure that not all of the Russians are happy with the losses, with the reduced living standard, with the lack of number of commodities, with no opportunity to travel around, and also with the fact that Russians generally will be for now several generations considered barbarians for what they did. So there is always a chance to find people in Russia who will be able to communicate, who will be a hope for Russia to change. But it will take time. We shouldn't be so short-sighted to isolate Russia entirely. So wherever we find someone who will be able to communicate, who will be able to discuss Russian future under different terms, we should use that opportunity.
What about Russian opposition leaders? Do you personally know some of them, any of them? Kasparov, Khodorkovsky, anyone else?
I met some of them at the margins of different conferences. They are strong voices, but unfortunately they don't have a broad base of support in Russia. So it is extremely important to listen to these people, because they have a deep internal knowledge of Russia, and they can communicate it to us, because not so many people really understand the way how Russians are thinking. But at the same time, we should also look for other personalities that will appear eventually, and once the war is over and the relations with Russia will start coming back to normal, we should probably offer an opportunity to those people who will be able and courageous enough to speak up, to invite them to different conferences, to let them speak in our universities, so that we understand the rationale behind Russian actions. Because only then, when we understand how they think, we can come up with good measures and good proposals that will work.
And from the other side, how do you view the attitude towards Russian citizens who reside in Europe and claim they don't support the Kremlin's position? Should they be allowed to extend visas or residence permits? Should students be granted opportunities to receive education and given opportunities to build in a career or business in the European Union?
I believe that as in the case of a number of war conflicts in the past, when there is an ongoing war, the security measures related to Russian nationals should be stricter than in normal times. So all Russians living in Western countries should be monitored much more than in the past, because they are citizens of a nation that leads an aggressive war. I think I can be sorry for these people, but at the same time, when we look back, when the Second World War started, all Japanese population living in the United States were under strict monitoring regime as well. That's simply a cost of war.
When you say monitoring, what exactly do you mean by that?
I mean, being under the scrutiny of security services.
Let's speak about Ukraine for a little. Ukrainian diplomatic ties with Prague have over 100-year-old history. But now Ukraine does not have an ambassador to the Czech Republic for almost a year. How has this affected bilateral ties?
I don't think that there was any serious impact, because in fact our relations went slowly down in quantity and quality. Right now we can say that diplomatic channels are open, but quite empty.
Recently you have met with a Ukrainian schoolgirl who was bullied by her classmates in the Czech Republic. Why have you considered it is important to personally support her?
It was my personal feeling, and I simply felt that was right, because I got angry when I learned the information. And since we were just organizing Children's Day at the Prague Castle, I thought that it would be a great opportunity to invite her, let her enjoy hospitality and friendship.
And let me ask one more question, the last one. European Union officials are warning about solidarity fatigue regarding refugees from Ukraine. So what Ukrainian who fled from war should now expect from the Czech Republic, and what may change in Czech support?
What can be called Ukraine fatigue or fatigue of war is a natural phenomenon. It simply comes with time. What we can do about it is keep repeating the real picture, not let people think that the war is now over, or that it doesn't have any more effect on us or on people living in Ukraine. I still think, and I'm sure that from a number of examples we can see it as a reality, Czech citizens are still in favor of offering hospitality and safe haven to those who are fleeing from war. It will obviously be more difficult with time, because economic, social difficulties now will have an impact on people, and they will be probably more focused on their own well-being than on assisting the others. But it is the role of politicians at all levels to maintain the view that successful end of war in Ukraine is in our own vital interest. And that's why it's right to keep assisting.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.